Why do you keep falling back into old patterns? Let's talk about it. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that quite literally separates you from your old self, from your impulses, and from your past conditioning. So it is the seat of your consciousness, which is the part that allows you to observe yourself instead of being completely run by your automatic patterns, right? When we talk about healing and embodiment and stepping into your next level identity, so identity shifting, what we are really doing is strengthening your ability to engage this part of the brain because it is the center of awareness, of self control, of decision making, and even identity based action. To put it simply, the prefrontal cortex is the CEO of your brain, which means that it governs your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in alignment with long term goals rather than short term impulses. So it helps you hold your vision of who you are becoming while your subconscious mind and body still try to pull you back to who you used to be. So while your ego is still tempting you to fall back into your old patterns. Okay. And every time that you choose to act from your awareness, so while you're using your prefrontal cortex, rather than falling into reaction, so into ego, into coping mechanisms, every time you take a breath before responding, every time you pause and decide to do what serves your higher self instead of your lower self, instead of your wounded self. That is when your prefrontal cortex is online and actively rewiring your brain. Now, to understand why this matters for your personal evolution, I want to break down what this region truly does. The prefrontal cortex sits right behind your forehead, right here. And it's responsible for what neuroscientists call executive functioning. Now, you don't need to know all of these scientific terms. I just really want you to grasp the concept of what I'm talking about, right? So, executive functioning, that means self reflection, emotional regulation, impulse control, planning, problem solving, and even moral reasoning. Okay. It's the part of your brain that can see the bigger picture, basically. So, it's what allows you to think before you act, to make sense of your emotions instead of drowning in them, instead of spiraling, okay? And to hold a long term vision, even when your body wants that instant gratification and those cheap dopamine hits. So, this area of your brain works closely with other regions as well. For example, the amygdala, which is the emotional alarm system of your body. We talked about that in a past video. When the amygdala detects potential threat, it sends a signal to activate your survival response, fight, flight, or freeze, like I explained in the video about the power of your subconscious mind as well. Now, in moments of stress or dysregulation, this part of your brain basically hijacks your nervous system, which makes you reactive and defensive and emotionally shut down. Okay? And this is where most people live unconsciously, constantly reacting to their environment, to their triggers, their emotions, without realizing that they are simply running on old survival programs. And while a lot of people have no idea how to get out of it, most don't even know that they're in it in the first place. The prefrontal cortex, however, acts as the brake system in that case. So it steps in and it says, wait, we're not in danger right now. We're safe. Let's shift our perspective and let's look at this differently. When your prefrontal cortex is active, so when it's switched on, you can step out of your reactivity and choose your response consciously. You can decide how you respond to a certain situation, person, conversation, whatever the situation may be. And you can reinterpret then what's happening instead of letting your nervous system dictate your entire behavior. And this is why nervous system regulation is such a key part of my personal work, because if your body is dysregulated, your prefrontal cortex literally goes offline. And you cannot think clearly, you cannot hold your higher vision, and you cannot make aligned decisions from that state. So when you learn how to regulate your body through breathwork, grounding, co-regulation, or any of the practices that I teach inside of my membership, you're not just calming yourself down, you're turning your higher brain back on. Your higher brain being the prefrontal cortex. So, in that situation, in that moment, you're creating the space between your emotion and your reaction. And this space is what allows transformation to happen. Without it, you're simply repeating the same patterns on autopilot. The prefrontal cortex also plays a vital role in what I call embodied awareness, which is the ability to stay conscious and connected to your body even while your old programs are being triggered. So, even while your old patterns are resurfacing. For example, let's say you're trying to break a pattern of people pleasing. You're subconscious mind, which associates love and safety with self abandonment in that moment, will create an immediate discomfort the moment that you try to set a boundary, the moment that you try to stand up for yourself. Your body probably feels tense. Your chest probably feels like it's becoming tighter. Your throat might close up and you're starting to stutter, your voice starts to shake. And if your prefrontal cortex isn't strong enough to hold that discomfort in that moment and to just for you to talk yourself through it, that is when you will slip back into the pattern, into your old pattern, just to relieve your tension, right? That's when you fall back into people pleasing again. Because that's easier, the easier way out. That's easier to do than for you to hold the uncomfortable part of just standing up for yourself. But if you stay grounded and you breathe and you remind yourself that this discomfort is not actually danger, it's simply expansion, it's simply a new habit, a new behavior, a new identity of yourself. And it's just unfamiliar because it is new. That is when your prefrontal cortex stays switched on and helps you choose the new behavior consciously. So it's easier for you and you are able to hold that discomfort. And you are able not to react out of a trigger. And every time you do this, you're reinforcing new neural pathways that represent safety and empowerment, safety in your truth, safety in standing in your worth, safety in what you have to say, right? Safety in that new identity, in that new version of you. And this is how you rewire your brain. It's not about suppressing your emotions or just thinking positive. It's about literally training your brain and body to coexist in safety while you act in alignment with the version of you that you are becoming. And the more you repeat this, the more automatic it becomes. Now, another key function of the prefrontal cortex is something called delayed gratification. I don't know if you've already heard about it, but it is your ability to hold off on instant pleasure in service of a greater reward. So, focusing on your end goal and not on the little process and dopamine hits that you get in between. This is the neurological foundation of self discipline, but it's also where your self trust is built, right? Every time that you follow through on what you said you would do, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable, actually, or even when you don't get any immediate satisfaction from it, when you don't actually have reached something, when it's just another thing that you did, that is when you're building evidence that you can rely on yourself. And this in turn rewires your identity because you stop being someone who tries to change and you become someone who actually embodies it. And it's important to know that the prefrontal cortex matures later in life and remains plastic. What that means is that it can keep evolving. And this means that no matter what your past has looked like, no matter how reactive or emotionally chaotic and immature and unintelligent that you've been, your brain can always learn to function differently. It can always change its matter, it can always rewire itself. You can train your prefrontal cortex just like a muscle in the gym through mindfulness, consistent nervous system regulation, intentional decision making, self reflection, identity shift work. Practices like meditation, actual intentional journaling, visualization, or any form of conscious embodiment, if they are done correctly, they strengthen this region because they teach your brain to pause and to observe and to reflect and then to choose. So, in the context of creating your reality, the prefrontal cortex is what allows you to become the conscious creator instead of the unconscious participant. So it's the bridge between your thought and embodiment, between your intention and your action, between knowing and actually being. It's what allows you to override the old programmings that say, this is just who I am, take it or leave it, right? And you can actually then consciously rewire yourself into, this is who I choose to be now, this is who I am. When your prefrontal cortex is online, that is when you live intentionally and not impulsively, because you think before you speak, you think before you react, you think before you act. You begin to see the space between who you were and who you're actually becoming, what you don't want to do and what you actually choose to do. And you make your decisions from that space instead of from emotion or fear or whatever the trigger is, survival. And this is why I always say healing is not about endlessly processing emotions, reopening and reliving old wounds, or talking about your past. It's about developing the capacity to stay conscious and embodied while your old self dissolves. So it's about strengthening the very part of your brain that allows you to hold the new identity even when the old one still tries to take over, right? Because you haven't changed overnight. There's still gonna be situations and people and conversations and things that are gonna trigger old memories, old experiences that won't feel good, that maybe feel traumatic. That will always happen because you're not perfect. We're human. You're human. But you can still choose to do that work in order to guide yourself through a situation like that, through a trigger like that. So you don't lash out, so you don't project, so you don't word vomit, so you don't say things that you're going to regret later, so you don't do things that you're going to regret later. So you have self-control. And that is exactly what I'm teaching inside my Coming Home to Yourself membership. So if you're not in it yet, get inside. Let's bring back your self-control. Let's teach you how to be a self-reliant, self-trusting human. Because you need your prefrontal cortex. But with all of your trauma, with your triggers, with your unconsciousness, that is not going to happen. Your prefrontal cortex is what turns awareness into power, emotion into wisdom, and vision into embodiment. It's what makes real change possible, simply by biology, right? That is how we're built. And when you strengthen this part of your brain, you become unstoppable because you're no longer being run by your thoughts and by your wounds, but led by your consciousness.